CNN senior military analyst, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Thank you so much for being here. I want to run through, Admiral, some of the recent reporting, some of the recent developments, including what I just made reference to, that these two individuals may have been waving toward the sky. What do you make of that development?
I think it hurts the case that we had authority to simply kill them while they're floating in the water. Hey, let's back up for 1 minute. Why do we want to hold ourselves to these kind of standards? I think there's a moral imperative to do so. I think there's legal imperatives, Geneva Conventions, laws of war. I keep coming back to the intelligence, Michael. You just laid out beautifully why we ought to stop these drug runners. A pretty good way to start would be, for example, to have captured these two, to have taken the intelligence from them, to have interrogated them. You can then drop a plumb line back to the routes, possibly all the way up to Maduro. All of that is an opportunity to reverse engineer the supply routes that you talk about. And then lastly, you know, as a former commander, and by the way, I was commander of U.S. Southern Command in charge of all these kind of operations for 3 years. I always think about reciprocity. If those were my Navy SEALs floating in the water, I would want them afforded the opportunity to surrender. So I think there's a lot of good reasons we ought to, as you say, pull this one apart. If we did something wrong, admit it, talk about it, and apply it so that we can continue to reverse engineer and kill the drugs, but also do the right thing as a military.
I'm trying to analyze all the details from different news reports in the absence, obviously, of the video. So there's the waving report. There's the fact that there's no satellite phone apparent in the hands of these two individuals. There's that account from the Times that the survivors were shirtless, clung to the hole, tried unsuccessfully to flip it back over, then climbed on it and slipped off into the water over and over. And as you well know, Admiral, the law in this circumstance relative to that DOD manual specifically cites shipwreck as an instance where you can't take action.
It does. And neither you nor I can make an informed judgment here because you're showing the only piece of evidence that we can actually look at with our own eyes. To your earlier point, there needs to be not only transparency with the videos, we do need to see that second video that you're describing from various media reports, but we also need to see the transcripts. I want to hear the audio. I'd like to see the JAG who was in the room with Admiral Bradley under oath talk about what he or she said to the Admiral. When I led the campaign against Libya in 2011, I had a JAG next to me essentially every time we dropped a bomb because you want to avoid collateral damage. You want to ensure you don't end up in that cell next to Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines, in The Hague. So bottom line, we need to have what lawyers would call a time of discovery here, and then make the judgments without fear or favor as to what happened on that day.
Admiral Stavridis, I think you're also highlighting another important aspect of this, which is that initially when the reports were made, as a layperson, I thought that this was some type of an instantaneous decision. The CNN reporting points out that there was a 41-minute deliberative process. So thought went into this, and I'm trying to be eminently fair to Admiral Bradley in this case. And as you pointed out, he relied on some legal justification.
He absolutely did. And by the way, Admiral Mitch Bradley has an absolutely sterling reputation in the military generally and in his community. My very good friend, Admiral Bill McRaven, has spoken to that quite recently. So again, and I'm sure Admiral Bradley would agree with this, let's have a thorough investigation. The question, I think, Michael, is who's going to do it? There's no IG in the Pentagon. He was fired. There are no senior JAGs. They were all fired.
Now is Democratic Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander of New Hampshire. She is a former intelligence officer for the U.S. Navy Reserve and serves on the House Armed Services Committee. It is very early, apparently, for me this morning. Maggie, Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. You know, you and these other members of Congress did this video. It really pissed off the president about illegal acts and whether or not military or people in the military should take illegal orders. It feels like it feels very prescient. One, did you guys have any idea about this second strike and that led you to maybe doing this video? And two, is this exactly what you were talking about?
Well, thanks so much for having me this morning. Look, no, we didn't know about, we still have so many questions that need to be answered about what happened on September 2nd. But the bottom line is the questions that we've been asking about the legal basis for all of these strikes, and there have been 22 to date, these questions remain unanswered. So what we did in coming together, the 6 of us, 2 from the Senate and 4 from the House, all of us who have served our country, sworn an oath to our Constitution, was to do something, as you say, it was so simple. We said, follow the law. And we repeated a basic principle of American law. And that really unglued the president, which I think proves our point.
Congresswoman, so what you and your fellow Democratic members was saying is no different than what then private citizen Pete Hegseth had to say on April 12th, 2016. Watch this.
I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander-in-chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
Sir, no.
I'm not saying.
And so, Congresswoman, what do you think changed? Because what he said there is absolutely right and no different than what you said in that video.
I really don't have any earthly idea what changed, but what I can tell you is that Pete Hegseth is a fundamentally unserious person who lacks the experience, who lacks the judgment, who lacks the character to serve as our Secretary of Defense. He never should have been nominated. He never should have been confirmed. He should resign or be fired immediately because he has done a great disservice to our service members, as we learned in the last few days, and the public can now see in the Inspector General's report about his use of a commercial texting app to conduct war plans. This endangers the lives of our service members, and this job is so incredibly important. It's one of the most important jobs in the world, the job of Secretary of Defense. Our country deserves someone at the helm who can lead, who can keep us safe, and who's going to be accountable to the American people.
And Congresswoman Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, said that he would not make a judgment on whether or not he believed the Department of Defense and Pete Hegseth had made a war crime until he had all of the information. What information do you think lawmakers are still lacking in order to make that determination? And what's your conclusion on the issue of war crimes specifically and that legal definition?
Well, I completely agree that, and as I said before, there are so many basic questions that we need answers to. I have not seen the video of the second strike. I believe, and I think there is a bipartisan agreement that the American people, everyone should see this film, and we should be able to take a look at the facts for ourselves. But there is a body of documentary evidence that we should see concerning this specific strike. But the broader point here, and my deep concern, it goes to the legal basis and the strategic value of this entire collection of 22 strikes. What is it that we're trying to do here? The president has said he's trying to stem the flow of drugs into the United States. I share that goal. That's an incredibly important goal. Overdose deaths have touched the lives of people across my home state of New Hampshire. But if that's the goal, why is the president pardoning a Honduran narco trafficker?
Guys, again, Trump's getting awful updates from his staff, I know, and from former top military people, they're literally using language like, oh man, at this point, you better hope you're able to avoid a cell at The Hague, talking to some of the people involved in this scandal. That's insane, right? The idea that they're already talking, like, look, I can say, as a guy on YouTube, and a reporter might say that hypothetically, or a member of Congress from the other party could say for political purposes that this is a war crime. But to have an actual military expert go and say, this is war crime stuff, and a cell at The Hague, you know, in the Netherlands, where they send all the notorious war criminals, you have to be preparing for that eventuality. My God, guys, that is wild. But honestly, it's valid. Because, I mean, there's the whole debate, to be fair, about whether this is even war, right? Like, United States has not declared war in Venezuela, and Venezuela hasn't declared war on the United States, and these aren't military targets. And it's not even clear that the justification for the bombings is valid, and even if the justification was valid, then the boats were going in the other direction, and they may not have, and then the double strike certainly wasn't. And so is this war crimes, or is it just crimes? Like, I'm sure that, like, legal experts will have to debate something like this for years, potentially. But the point is, if you have a supreme, like, NATO commander type guy on there saying, like, using the cell at The Hague comments, Trump and his people messed up. One thing I'll say, look, I don't ultimately think Trump is going to go to The Hague, but let's be clear. The United States Supreme Court, I think, said that the president can't be locked up domestically for what he does as president. I don't know if that applies to international war crimes.